What's up, YouTube? I'm the Vanilla Nerd, and today I get to do something I've been excited for since I started my channel, which is do a ranking video. Now, the reason I haven't done one yet is because I wanted to build up my channel a little bit. I know I've only done 10 videos at this point, but I'm excited for this one to be my 11th, now that I've kind of built up my street cred, if you will. Anywho, we're going to be doing a ranking video, and since I've talked a lot about Star Wars, I figured I would rank all 11 theatrically released Star Wars movies. So we're not going to do any of the TV shows, mainly because I don't think it's fair to compare across mediums, although I'm sure other people do, and that is totally valid and fair, but I don't want to do that, so we're not going to do that. We're just going to talk about the 9 episodes, and then Solo, a Star Wars story, and Rogue One, a Star Wars story, the 2 individual ones. So we'll get into that here in a second. But before we do that, I want to acknowledge that I know this will be a very controversial video, because many people have very strong opinions about Star Wars, and that's okay. It's alright to love Star Wars and have different opinions than others. Just don't be mean down in the comment section. I know that I don't have very many followers, but still, I want to practice good YouTube etiquette and ask for people to be polite and respectful. So there, that's my little request. Now, you may be wondering why even make this video if I know it's going to be so controversial, but that's because 1, I don't think it will be that controversial, and 2, just by the nature of me reviewing these movies, and I will be doing individual movie reviews eventually, people will get a sense of where I fall and what I feel about different movies. The other big reason I want to do it is because I feel like it's a great way to connect with people, where you can see, oh, this is how he ranks them, this is what he values, this is what he thinks, and it's a great way to see. I love when any of my favorite YouTubers do ranking videos or tier list videos, because I get to see more about their personality, I get to learn more about them. And so that's the purpose of this video, partially just so you guys get to know me a little bit better. So yeah. Also, I want to give a quick spoiler warning, just so you know, all 11 movies will be spoiled. And so if you haven't seen them and you don't want them spoiled, get out while you have a chance. Otherwise, I'm going to be talking about them at length in this video. Now, with all that out of the way, let's get to ranking these movies. I'm actually going to start in the middle of my ranking list at the 6th position and work my way out. So I'm going to do 1 below the 6th and then 1 above the 6th and then 2 below and then 2 above and so on and so forth. Because 1, I'm a middle child, so the middle never gets to start. And 2, I think the ends, my most favorite movie and my least favorite movie, are the most exciting bits. So I want to save those to the end. And we're going to end on my most favorite Star Wars movie, so that's exciting. But I do understand that some people don't want to deal with the wait and don't really care about my explanations, so if that is you, that is fine. Here's a timestamp to all of 11 rankings, and it's at the end of the video. You can hear my concluding remarks, and you can just see, does it line up with yours or does it not? Totally valid, totally fine. So, with that out of the way, let's jump in to number 6, which is Rogue One. Now, Rogue One is in 6th place, not because it's middle of the road or it's an average Star Wars movie. In fact, I think it's an above average Star Wars movie. I think it's a really good movie overall. And I think that's just a testament to the Star Wars movie franchise that over half of their movies I really, really enjoy and think are phenomenal and fantastic and wonderful. So just because it's 6 doesn't mean it's the worst. Now, jumping into the movie itself, I really like Rogue One, and the reason I ranked it so high is because its plot is quite phenomenal. I love the ragtag group of rebels that have to steal the Death Star plans. It's quite exciting, and they have one of the best Star Wars space battles in all of Star Wars. It is so good. I really enjoy them trying to break that shield generator so that they can get to the Death Star plan files. It works really, really well. The reason I ranked it kind of low, though, at 6th place and not 1st or anything, is because the characters are really lacking for me. They're pretty shallow. They don't have a lot of depth to them. Cassian is probably the best. If you want to hear more, go watch the individual review to it. But it's a good film. It just doesn't have great characters, and that's why it's number 6. Next, going 1 below, we're going to go to the 7th ranked video, and that is going to be Episode 7, Star Wars The Force Awakens. And I really like Star Wars The Force Awakens. It was my first Star Wars movie that I got to see in theaters, so there's a lot of nostalgia and love for it there. And I thought that it was actually a pretty fun movie. That being said, Its plot does steal heavily from episode 4 and some of episodes 5 and 6 as well. And so for that, it kind of has to go lower. The other thing is, while I really enjoyed this initial introduction to the characters, Finn was a really cool character being this deserting stormtrooper, and Poe, the charismatic pilot, was hilarious and entertaining, and Rey, this optimistic young Jedi, was great. I thought they were really fun characters. It's just unfortunate because I know where their characters end up, and it's not very good. And so I have a bittersweet feeling towards this movie where it was a really strong introduction. Unfortunately, I don't think episodes 8 and 9 lived up to that. And that probably gives away some of my rankings for episodes 8 and 9, but yeah, it is what it is. Next, moving on to my 5th favorite Star Wars movie, that would have to be Star Wars Episode 1, The Phantom Menace. And I really like The Phantom Menace. I think it's a really good Star Wars movie. I loved it as a kid. I grew up with nostalgia towards it. Primarily, I loved Darth Maul and the pod racing. Darth Maul was the coolest lightsaber combatant. His duel was awesome with both Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon Jinn. So cool. And the pod racing was so fun to watch. It was just really entertaining as a kid. That being said, the pod racing does take up 15 minutes of this 2-hour-long movie, which is to say a lot. And I think that's one of the cons I have with this film, which is that it's a slower movie. There's a lot of scenes that drag on a little bit too long. You can see this with the pod racing. You can see this with the scenes on Coruscant. There's just a lot of scenes that take longer than they need to, and that drags the movie down. That being said, I do enjoy the movie. I really like seeing Senator Palpatine rise in power and use a trading fiasco to his advantage. I really love Darth Maul. I think he's one of the coolest villains in all of Star Wars. And I really like Qui-Gon Jinn. So the characters are solid. The plot is just lacking. Next, we move on to my 8th favorite Star Wars film, and that would have to be Star Wars Episode 2, Attack of the Clones. And I know what you're going to say, this is very surprising, but when it comes right down to it, I really don't like this film. And the main thing dragging it down is the plot. And while Obi-Wan's plot of detective work is very interesting, it's such a small part of this film. Most of this film is devoted to Anakin and Padme falling in love. And it's so isolated from the rest of the plot, and not a lot much happens, which is very kind of boring and sad. On top of all that, it's not very well executed. I do not believe that these two are actually in love, and that is a problem if that is the main focus of your movie. So that's kind of what drags this movie down a lot, and there's also more politics in this movie that aren't handled the best and aren't executed well. So yeah, this movie is kind of a weak thing. That being said, there are a few scenes that I want to highlight. Number 1, lightsaber fights, fantastic as ever. I really enjoy Count Dooku versus all 3 Jedi. It's really well done. Obi-Wan versus Jango Fett, so cool. The droid factory with Anakin and Padme fighting in the droid factory, really fun, very dynamic scene. And then lastly, Anakin on the speeder bike going to find his mom is so cool. I love the Duel of the Fates playing in the background, and I love that first step into the dark side when he kills the Tusken Raider village. I know it's been memed out of existence, but it's still a good scene showing his descent to the dark side. So I do like a lot of aspects of episode 2, but overall I really don't enjoy it, which is why it's number 8. Next, we move on to my 4th favorite Star Wars film, and that would be Star Wars Episode 4, A New Hope. And it's no surprise here, this movie deserves to be highly ranked because it's the film that started it all. Without this film being so good, we wouldn't have Star Wars. We wouldn't have 11 movies and multiple TV shows to talk about. But because of this film that started it all, we have this amazing franchise and this amazing world that we get to dive into, and that is so, so cool. But it's not only a good Star Wars film, it's also a good film in general. In film classes, it's basically the textbook definition of the hero's journey. And outside of that, this film pushed the boundaries for special effects, accelerating that industry into the stratosphere, to which now special effects are seen as a huge way to boost and improve your filmmaking capacity. And that's so, so cool. That being said, this is still a Star Wars film, and there's a lot of cool Star Wars things to like about it, from the aliens to the props like the blasters and lightsabers and spaceships, all the way to the attack on the Death Star. I mean, that battle is just so cool, and one of my favorite things about Star Wars ever. Now, the reason this movie is ranked at number 4 and not higher is because it is kind of a slower movie, and because it's a good foundation. But what's exciting is not just where these characters begin, but where they end up. And that's more exciting to me, and that's why number 4 is kind of ranked lower on the list. Next, I want to talk about my ninth favorite Star Wars film, Star Wars Episode 9, The Rise of Skywalker. And at this point, the cat is out of the bag, and I will freely admit that I did not enjoy the sequel trilogy that much. But I also didn't hate it. I think there's a lot to like about the sequel trilogy. I just think there's a lot more that I didn't like about the sequel trilogy. And that's for me personally. I know there's many people who really enjoyed the sequel trilogy, and I'm happy for you, and I'm not trying to take anything away from you and your enjoyment of it. But for me personally, I just didn't like it. I wanted to like it. It was new Star Wars, and I wanted it to be as good and as loving as the original, but it just wasn't for me. Now, in the future, I am more than willing to talk about my feelings towards the sequel trilogy, but right now I'm doing a ranking video. So, in talking about Episode 9 specifically, the best word I found to describe my feelings toward it is hollow. And I love this word for it because it perfectly describes how Episode 9 has all the trappings and decorations of a Star Wars movie, but lacks the substance in character, plot, and charm. And that's just really unfortunate because this movie could have been as good as like Avengers Endgame, but it just wasn't. Now, when I talked about Episode 7, I said that Episode 7 was bittersweet because I know where the characters end up. Well, Episode 9 is where the characters end up. And at this point, it's sad that the most interesting thing about Rey is her parentage, not her. With Finn, we never learn more about his experience being a stormtrooper or the repercussions that has on him and his psyche. With Poe, instead of doing anything interesting or unique, they went with the Han Solo route and made him a spice runner, the exact same as Han Solo. And it's really, really sad that these characters that I really loved and enjoyed in Episode 7 didn't grow beyond that anymore. At least not in a meaningful way that I enjoyed, and that's too bad. Now, I will end on a positive note. What I do like about Episode 9 is it is a fun movie. I walk out of the theaters and I enjoy my experience. I walk away from the credits rolling and I have enjoyed my movie watching experience, which is more than I can say for a film on this list. Next, I want to talk about my third favorite Star Wars film, and that would be Star Wars Episode 3, Revenge of the Sith. And this movie is great. I think it still has its flaws, but overall, it's a very good movie. The opening scene is fantastic and does such a good job of showing the bond between Anakin and Obi-Wan as they take down General Grievous's droid ship and save the Chancellor. It's so good. The middle is a bit slower, though, and I think it has some good character development, especially with Anakin pushing himself into a corner and feeling like his only option is to go to Palpatine. And also you have Obi-Wan versus General Grievous, and that was a really fun action scene. But overall, I think the middle is just lacking. That being said, when this movie does pick up with Mace Windu versus Palpatine, it picks up wonderfully. Mace Windu versus Palpatine, such a cool lightsaber fight, one of my favorites in the entire trilogy and the entire Star Wars universe, really. And then the end, you have Anakin falling to the dark side. You have the emotionally heart-wrenching Order 66 scene that is done and shot so well. You have the desperate last-ditch effort of Yoda versus Palpatine trying to stop the rise of the Empire. And then you have the heartbreaking duel between Obi-Wan and Anakin, brother against brother. It is so good. Their battle is done so well. The only reason Episode 3 is not ranked higher is because it's kind of slow in the middle and because it ends on a very dark and sad note, a very tragic note. And I wouldn't change that, but it is what it is, and I prefer happy endings to sad ones, which is why Episode 3 is in spot number 3. Next, I want to talk about my 10th favorite Star Wars film, and that is Solo: A Star Wars Story. Now, this is the first movie I actively dislike, and it's because I think they did the character of Han Solo so poorly. First and foremost, Han Solo should have been a more successful smuggler. I don't know why Disney thinks it's funny to show Han Solo as a failed smuggler, but they do. In Episode 7, he was this washed-up old deadbeat, and in this movie, it was even worse. He never once succeeded at a smuggling job, and it was frustrating because I want my hero to succeed, and when you show him constantly failing, it doesn't make me think he's that cool anymore. Another thing that I really didn't like is that they only ever allude to him flying TIE fighters. They never actually show him flying a TIE fighter. I know there's a deleted scene of it, but that doesn't matter. The movie that we got, he doesn't fly TIE fighters, and that is so frustrating to me because I think it would have been so much more visually interesting and entertaining to see him flying TIE fighters, being this ace crackshot pilot who's amazing, and the Empire not liking it because they want him to conform to the boring old Empire stuff, and that would have been so much cooler, but instead, this is what we got. And that's unfortunate. Now, I know many people actually like this film and think it doesn't deserve the hate it gets. But I will humbly disagree. I think this movie did not do a good job with Han Solo. I'm not trying to take away from your enjoyment, but that is my opinion. There were some good things about this movie, and I will say overall it is a fun action-adventure film. The train heist in particular is one of my favorite scenes. It's a really good and dynamic scene, and Lando Calrissian is a really funny character and has all the charm and funness of Lando. I think that's great. But I don't think they did our main character, our titular character, very, very well. So, I walk away enjoying the movie experience, if not the Star Wars experience of this movie, if that makes any sense. Next, I want to talk about my second favorite Star Wars movie, and that is Star Wars Episode 5, The Empire Strikes Back. And at this point, I'm sure many of you know what the first and 11th place are going to be, but I'm going to keep them hidden for now. Now, when it comes to Episode 5, it is arguably the greatest Star Wars film of all time, and I can readily agree with that. I really like this movie. Unlike virtually every other Star Wars film, it is paced perfectly. Every scene is valuable and it flows wonderfully. There's no scene that I wish was sped up. There's no scene that I wish was slowed down. I love the two plot lines of Luke training with Yoda and the rest of the Star Wars gang trying to escape the Empire. The Millennium Falcon flying through the asteroid field will never not be cool to me, and the music is iconic. One of my favorite things about this film is that our heroes fail smartly. Unlike Solo, these characters actually have successes along with their failures. Han Solo successfully evades the Empire for a really long amount of time, and he even outmaneuvers them brilliantly. He only fails because a specialized bounty hunter figured out his ploy and his tactic. Luke, same story. He successfully trains to be a Jedi. He learns so much more about the Force, but he still fails to lift his X-Wing out of the swamp. But that doesn't discount his training and his successes. And at the end of this film, he puts up a decent battle against Darth Vader. And that lightsaber battle is so cool and so much better than the lightsaber battle in Episode 4. It was awesome. And then the hectic escape from Cloud City, even better. Just so fun, so well done. Similar to Episode 3, though, this movie ends on a sad note, and that's why it's number 2 and not number 1. Next, we move on to my 11th favorite Star Wars film, or you could say my least favorite Star Wars film, and that would be Star Wars Episode 8, The Last Jedi. And surprise, surprise, I know, it feels like with this movie you either love it and think it's the best thing to ever happen to Star Wars, or you hate it and wish it never existed. And that's unfortunate, because one of my favorite things about movies and film is their capacity to unite people. I can't tell you the number of times I've met people from different backgrounds, different political views, different religions, different views in general, and yet we both love the Avengers, or we both thoroughly enjoy the Harry Potter movies, or we think Star Wars is great, and that has happened. So one of the saddest things about this film for me is that it's so divisive, and that I can't use it to unite with very many people. Sure, the people who agree with me, who don't like it, yeah, we can connect, but then there's the people who do really like it, and I can't connect with them. And no matter where you fall on that spectrum, you have to admit that one of the saddest things about it is that it has effectively split the fandom. Now, I know there are many people on both sides of the debate who are more than willing to have a respectful conversation and discuss why they do or don't like the film, and that's wonderful, and I'm grateful that at least in that small way this movie can unify people. And I'd like to consider myself one of those people that could have a debate with someone who loves this movie, and we could discuss why we have such a difference of opinion. I think that's one of the best ways to effectively communicate. That being said, I feel like more often than not, this movie causes people to attack and to be unkind towards others, and that is unfortunate. So in that light, I want to make it clear before I move on that if you do like this film, that is totally valid, and you are still a true Star Wars fan. I feel like, at least on my side, with people who don't like this movie, a lot of people claim that if you do like this film, you aren't a true Star Wars fan, and that's just mean. And I'm sure there's people who've done it on the other side, but I just am speaking from my own experience. I've seen this happen, and that's just sad, because at the end of the day, it's a movie, and people can like it or not, and they are still Star Wars fans. It's not, that's just wrong. Moving on, talking about episode 8 specifically, what didn't I like about this film? You may be surprised to know that Luke's portrayal is not the biggest issue I have with this movie. It's part of it, but really my biggest issue is how poorly they treated all of the characters. Because for me personally, there's not one character in this entire film who compels me and makes me like them and root for them. Not one. If we look at the poster, Luke, Rey, Kylo, Leia, Rose, Finn, General Hux, Poe, literally all of them are unlikable, deeply flawed, poor decision-making characters in my opinion. And as a guy whose favorite thing from any story is character, this is a bad film when it makes me feel like this. Now, I know there are many people who actually did like the character work that is done in this and think that the characters are done great, and I'm happy for you. But I didn't enjoy it, and if you can understand that, you can probably understand why I didn't like this film. Another issue I have with this film is that it did not follow through on most of the plot hooks laid down in episode 7. Now, this could be a bigger criticism of the sequel trilogy in general and the fact that it was not planned out from the start, but still, this movie failed to answer most of the questions I had when I left Star Wars episode 7, and so that's really unfortunate, especially as someone who was hyped for this film. So now I think you have a better understanding of why this film is ranked number 11 and is my least favorite Star Wars film. I have more reasons. I want to dive into this deeper, but I've already taken up way too much time on this movie alone. So I look forward to the future when I rewatch this film with fresh eyes and get to talk about it in a little more depth. And I might even do individual movies talking about individual issues, like the issue of the characters or the issue of the plot hooks or anything else. So stay tuned for that. That's how I feel about Star Wars Episode 8. Finally, we reach the top of the list, my favorite Star Wars movie, and that would be Star Wars Episode 6, Return of the Jedi. And I really do love this film, but I acknowledge its flaws. In fact, it has more flaws than Empire Strikes Back, Revenge of the Sith, and A New Hope, my other top 4 choices. For instance, the Jabba's Hutt rescue mission is very poorly planned. It takes up a third of the movie, and it really only accomplishes 2 things for the plot. 1, it establishes that Luke is slipping towards the dark side, and 2, it explains why Han Solo is back in fighting action. But besides that, there's not much of a point to the Jabba's Hutt set piece, and that's kind of a bad thing for a film to do. Furthermore, the pacing of this film is all over the place and is a big criticism I had of other Star Wars movies. And that's not even mentioning the Ewoks that are in this movie. But for all its issues, Episode 6 remains my favorite because the ending is so solid. I talked about how Empire Strikes Back and Revenge of the Sith are both really good movies with really sad and somewhat tragic endings. But Episode 6 is different. The ending of Episode 6, the galaxy is saved, the Empire has been vanquished, and the Jedi have been restored. In a sentence, evil is defeated. And that is wonderful. I love the joy and hope and celebration that is the ending of Episode 6. And beyond that, the third act of this movie is stunning overall. There's the awesome space battle that's happening above Endor, and we get to see the Millennium Falcon just flying all over the place and all the different Rebel fleet ships doing their thing. It's great. The ground battle is so fun. You know, it's a little suspends my disbelief, right? Because Ewoks are beating up stormtroopers, but it's still a fun little battle. And more than anything else, the intimate duel between father and son in the throne room of the Death Star is phenomenal. Some of the best Star Wars ever. And because of this, this movie has my favorite ending and is my favorite Star Wars film. So there you have it, all 11 theatrically released Star Wars movies ranked, according to me, the Vanilla Nerd. I do realize that there was another Star Wars movie theatrically released, and that is the 2008 Star Wars The Clone Wars animated movie, but I didn't include it because I feel like it's connected more to the TV show anyways, so it's not in here. Also, as you can see, I lean towards the George Lucas era of movies more, but that's not to say I don't enjoy the Disney era. There have been some very good movies to come out of Disney Star Wars, and I'm grateful that Star Wars stories are continuing to be told. Another fun thing is that episodes 3, 4, 7, and 9 kind of line up in their rankings with where I ranked them. It's kind of funny. 7th ranked movie is also the 7th ranked episode, but you know what? It is what it is. That is legitimately how I would rank them. It just so happened that 4 of them lined up that way. So that's just a fun little tidbit. Anywho, I hope you guys learned more about me, the Vanilla Nerd, and what I like in movies. I'd love to know whether you agree or disagree with anything I've said. Just please keep it respectful, as I've been saying down in the comments. So, that's it for me. Talk to you later.